We are doing a volume test for live screen. I'm just testing mute. 1 second, please. Representative, I am currently on the phone with Anthony. He's having some IT issues, so we are trying to get him logged back in. If you could give me 1 more minute, please.
This is Caroline. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I know they're working to get Anthony on as he navigates his IT issues, but why don't we get the ball rolling since we do have a hard stop? And thanks everybody for your patience.
All right, great. Hello, everyone. My name's Anita Earls, and I am co-chair of the Governor's Task Force on Racial Equity and Criminal Justice. I want to welcome all of you this afternoon, and a huge thanks to our panel. On behalf of my co-chair, Secretary Buffalo, we're just really thrilled to have this opportunity to hear about juvenile life without parole. And I'm going to quickly, since we're a little late getting underway, hand over to the moderator for our panel. And it's someone who I know in many ways needs no introduction, but let me just review for all of us her amazing accomplishments. So Representative Marcia Morey has agreed to moderate our panel. She has been a task force member from the beginning. She is currently a representative representing the 30th district, which is in Durham County. She was appointed to that role in 2017 and has won re-election since then. But prior to that, for 18 years, she was a district court judge and a chief district court judge for 5 years. But beyond those really important and clearly relevant roles, she spearheaded the misdemeanor diversion program in Durham County, and in 1998, she was executive director of the Governor's Commission on Juvenile Crime and Justice, which in many ways has been a model for what we've tried to do with the task force. And since 2021, Governor Cooper appointed her to serve on the North Carolina Juvenile Sentence Review Board to review certain sentences and make recommendations to the governor. So obviously an incredible depth of background. And Representative Morey, we're so grateful to you for being here this afternoon and being willing to moderate this panel.
Justice Earls, thank you very much, and thank our panelists, everyone who's watching. We really, really appreciate your being here. Some people may be a little bit new to TREC, and I just want to review that back in June of 2020, Governor Cooper signed an executive order which established the Racial Equity and Criminal Justice Task Force and appropriately appointed Justice Earls as the chair. She does have the co-chair now. This is TREC 2. It's been going on since 2020. There was a report issued after 2 years of work that came up with 125 recommendations for changes in our criminal justice system. And this is one of the changes that was recommended, to look at juvenile life without parole, to see where North Carolina is and where should we be going. The United States is the only country that has juvenile life without parole. And we've had it up until the Supreme Court stepped in with some of their rulings, most notably Miller versus Alabama in the years around 2005 to 2016, which several US Supreme Court decisions started banning extreme sentences for children, that they were cruel and unusual. And ultimately, states in Miller versus Alabama in 2012 holding that mandatory life without parole for all children was unconstitutional. Since that time, states across the country, progressive states like California, Oregon, conservative states, Utah, West Virginia, have looked at this issue. And the state legislatures have brought statutes up to ban juvenile life without parole. Right now, I think we have 26 states that have banned juvenile life without parole. And kind of the cornerstone of this is what Justice Anthony Kennedy said, that any parent knows that children are different than adults, that they lack the judgment and the self-control, and that the scientists, brain scientists, neuroscientists recognize the development of the human brain and the inhibitions that go along with it are not complete for anyone until their mid-20s. So going along with Miller versus Alabama, North Carolina is looking to address this issues as some of the other states, and we have a state senator from North Dakota here that will hear her experience about this issue. The last session in 2021, we had House Bill 2824. It was introduced bipartisan by sponsors. The primary sponsors in the House were Representative John Hardister, Representative Kristen Baker, Representative John Faircloth, and Representative David Rogers. As soon as they introduced this bill, which would eliminate juvenile life without parole and make people parole eligible after 25 years on a first-degree murder charge or 15 years parole eligible on other charges. 20 co-sponsors signed on, and the bill was heard in committee, but was not voted on, and we have yet to have that go to a vote. So the question is very ripe. We are excited to have our panelists, and I am briefly going to introduce our panelists who are here, and we are very appreciative. First of all, let me welcome and thank Representative John Hardister, who is crossing the state now, running for a statewide office for Secretary of Labor. We appreciate him being here. As I mentioned, he was one of the primary sponsors of the House Bill 824. He represents Guilford County. He's in his 6th term, and we really appreciate his support and his thoughts on this. Next, I'd like to introduce Representative Charles Smith. And Representative Smith is a freshman legislator from Cumberland County. He's a UNC law graduate, former assistant DA. He's been in private practices and focuses on civil litigation and appellate matters in Fayetteville. Senator Diane Larson. If you can just wave for a minute if you have everyone on your screen. Thank you. Senator Larson is joining us from North Dakota. She is a veteran legislator, has served in the House and in the Senate, and has been the chair of the Judiciary Committee. She helped pass the elimination of juvenile life without parole back in 2017. She worked 23 years as a civilian for the Bismarck Police Department and a youth worker with the Police Youth Bureau, which provides diversion, crisis intervention, and education. And we really appreciate her joining us and giving us some background of how they did it in North Dakota. Jeff Neiman, we appreciate the district attorney from Orange Chatham County, Jeff Neiman. He's an advocate for rehabilitation, racial justice, ending the criminalization of poverty. He became the elected DA just last year in Orange Chatham, and he had worked previously as assistant DA for many years. Very progressive, working for rehabilitative alternatives for incarceration of people in North Carolina. Thank you, Mr. DA. Reverend Jason Hackett. Representative Hackett is here with us. He is a clinical chaplain at the Piedmont Correctional Institution. He administers pastoral care to staff and offenders. We appreciate Reverend Hackett you being here. Reverend Tim Webster is here, and Reverend Webster is an elder in the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. He serves 3 rural churches in Randolph County, a member of the High Point NAACP, and chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee. He's been involved with Epiphany Ministries and holds spiritual retreats with incarcerated juveniles. Thank you, Representative Webster. And finally, but not least at all, I think Anthony Willis is on, or hopefully will soon be on. Anthony is a formerly incarcerated youth. He's received a sentence of life in prison without parole in 1997 when he was 16. Anthony was granted clemency by Governor Cooper 2 years ago, has been out, is very successful, and we hope with technical issues we can get Anthony back on, and he will be joining us soon. So with that, those are the panelists we have. We have others that have joined us that are members of TREC, and we really appreciate it. We have Senator Mohammed from Charlotte, Sheriff Burkhead from Durham, Mike Hawkins, all who are on the TREC task force, and we appreciate it. Nisha Williams and Jeffrey Smythe. Thanks a lot for joining us as well. Let's just start, and I'll throw it open. Let's have it as informal as possible, but let's start. And there's Anthony. He's the one with the smile and the red shirt. We're glad you made it, Anthony. Thank you, and we're going to get to you soon. With our first question, why are you all interested in this topic? Why are you here? Let's start, Representative Hardister, just briefly tell us why you introduced the bill and what would you like to see happen?
Yeah, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Perfect.
Got me? Okay, I see a thumbs up. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to have this discussion. The reason I support this is because it's just common sense. I've had conversations with those who work in justice and public safety on all different angles of justice and public safety, and I think what really compelled me the most is the fact that science is very clear, and that the brain is not fully developed in some cases until age 25. And I mean, we're all young at one point in our lives, and we sometimes don't make the best decisions, and there are certainly some things that are inexcusable. And there needs to be retribution and punishment and so forth, and justice when certain crimes are committed. But if the brain is not fully developed, I think we have to take that scientific fact into account. I mean, you can't enter into a contract till age 18. You can't get a tattoo till age 18 or join the military, and some things even later than that. Like you cannot legally purchase alcohol until age 21. So that's really reason number one. A second thing that really stood out to me is the fact that it's not automatic. You're saying that you're eligible for consideration for parole. It doesn't mean that parole is always going to be granted. And then you can have a certain time frame built in, like it could be 15, 20 years down the road before that opportunity even exists in the first place. And another thing is that some of those who are incarcerated, if they're incarcerated as a juvenile without parole, I mean, just it takes all hope away. And so, for what incentives that person have to turn their life around, to learn, to grow, to become a better person, it kind of takes all that away. And I'm encouraged that people on both sides of the aisle are starting to look at this and understand that it's not a political issue. And given that I'm a Republican, I can speak for some of those on the right, like Mark Levin and Newt Gingrich, for example, have come out and supported this initiative. So hopefully we can make some progress and add North Carolina to that growing list of states across the country.
Thank you very much, Representative. Really appreciate your leadership on this. And let's go to Representative Charles Smith. This is his first term as a Democrat, former assistant DA. So what would you say? Why are you interested in this, Representative Smith?
Yeah, thanks everybody. It's really great to be here. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Everyone can hear me okay?
Great.
For me, something that's part of the criminal system that's really interesting is just sentencing generally. I look at criminal sentencing really in three distinct areas: rehabilitation, deterrence, and retribution. And probably in that order. I don't think that retribution is really the main goal of criminal sentencing, especially when you're talking about first-time offenders. It's why we have deferred prosecution mechanisms written into our law. Something like conditional discharge, which would allow a first-time offender to potentially preserve their criminal record after a probationary period. They generally come in, enter a plea of guilty, and assuming they complete conditions of probation successfully, that guilty plea is ultimately stricken from the court. I think it's why sentencing might be harsher for individuals with more significant criminal records, even when engaged in the same criminal activity. It's why we have habitual felon statute. It's why we have statutes like habitual misdemeanor assault. If you have 2 misdemeanor assault convictions within 15 years, your sentence can go from some level of misdemeanor to a Class H felony. So I think in other aspects of our criminal law and sentencing in particular, we show a preference for rehabilitation, especially when talking about young people or first-time offenders. And youth in particular, and Representative Hardister kind of hit on this, youth that commit serious or violent acts are better able to change. They may engage in criminal activity at a younger age because of developmental immaturity, proclivity to act in rash ways, and really more susceptible to just negative influences and their environment. So I think it makes them less blameworthy for criminal conduct. But there's also that greater ability to be rehabilitated and really be productive members of society. And I think we need to encourage that and foster that.
Great, thank you. Now I'm going to flip it over District Attorney Jeff Neiman. And Jeff, please tell us where you are on the issue. And I know there's a case that was very a lot of public probably opposition to this issue because it was such a high profile case a couple of years ago in Chapel Hill. If you have any thoughts on that, or if that sways your opinion on this case.
Well, there's a lot there, Representative Morey. Thank you. So I guess my short answer to the initial question is, why am I here? I think the easy answer is because Carolyn emailed me about 7 times. And I think I finally gave in. I guess I want to open by saying I think I am probably one of this issue's best allies among the elected district attorneys, there being 42 of us. So I want to say that up front. And I believe I'm the second DA in the state's history that has run on an overt platform of being anti-death penalty. I was an advocate for raise the age well in advance of its passage, not in no small part to a talk that I heard from Representative Morey then Judge Morey about 15 years ago, that really turned my thoughts, didn't change my mind, but really focused my attention to the issue, I guess I'd say. And so I guess I want to say I am broadly an advocate, an ally on this issue. That said, I think probably in the end, the reason that I agreed to come on this panel is because it appeared to me that there was going to be no one on the panel that would be here representing the perspective of crime victims. And although, to be sure, I recognize that the district attorney's role is not to be a lawyer on behalf of victims, both by practice and by statute, there is a responsibility that we have to defend the rights of victims in court. And I do want to have somebody here who's kind of speaking from that perspective. And I could talk for a while about Eve Carson. That's what, and Lawrence Lovett, I should say, the defendant, that's what Representative Maury was referring to in 2008. Lawrence Lovett, who at the time was 17 years and 9 months old, along with a co-defendant, brutally kidnapped and killed the then sitting student vice president at UNC Chapel Hill. And I would reframe the thought about that case and would say that that's a really important case, not because it's high profile or got a lot of attention, but because it was especially cruel and serious case, and is an exemplar of why this is not as easy, in my mind, as easy an issue to arrive at a conclusion on than maybe it is for some on the panel. I'll speak more about my thoughts on it, but that's my opening thoughts.
Thank you, and we really appreciate it. I know that it's a difficult topic, and your predecessor brought that up in our committee when we debated the entire issue. So Jeff, we really thank you. Before we get to the advocates, I want to bring in Senator Larson, because they did this in North Dakota in 2017. And Senator, can you tell us about how the legislation was passed, the opposition that came up, if any, and how is it going since then? Any problems come up? Any second thoughts on eliminating life without parole?
Well, thank you. For us in North Dakota, we did pass this unanimously in both chambers. And so we really did not have the opposition. The things that were discussed, one, like we've all been talking about brain science. In my work with juvenile offenders, there were many times parents would come in with their kids and they'd say, I asked them why they did it, and they just said they don't know. Well, if we all think back to when we were kids, there were times we did stuff. We didn't know why we did it. It was just there. We just did it. And that's because that executive functioning isn't fully developed in that prefrontal cortex. And so because of that, we are not using our best judgment. And so I am 100% in favor of accountability. I think that the fact that this didn't say we're doing away with life without parole, we're saying we're doing away with life without the possibility of parole. So when there is somebody who is a serious offender, and I was talking with you, Representative, before we started about a young man in North Dakota that had murdered both of his parents and his siblings and his grandmother, and it was very gruesome. He is still in prison. He was eligible for parole. He went before the parole board. He was denied. He is, I don't know what his psychiatric designation is, if he's some kind of a psychopath or what, but he is not a safe person to have on the streets. And so it's not like life without parole is something then that, okay, then everybody gets paroled. It's that you have you're eligible for parole. And so I think that those are the things that kind of overcame anybody's concerns about it. And so yes, we didn't have any opposition. It passed unanimously. We haven't had any concerns. I contacted the prison, in fact, even this morning, and they don't have any concerns about anybody that has been paroled. They're not sure that we really have hardly any, because we don't have that very many juveniles sentenced to that in North Dakota. So It's not, we don't have any big numbers of people to talk about, but I think that the system works in that when somebody should not be paroled, they're just not. The parole board says, no, you can't be out on the streets.
Thank you very much. And that's amazing. Unanimously, it was passed, and predominantly a Republican supermajority in North Dakota.
It has become increasingly a supermajority in North Dakota. In 17, it wasn't as much of a majority as it is now. Like I was telling you, we have 47 senators and 4 of them are Democrat. We have more arguments among the between Republicans than we do between the two parties. So I think that this is something that it really doesn't have to do with Republican or Democrat philosophy. We all think that people who commit terrible crimes should be held accountable. They should be answerable for their crimes. But there needs to be some opportunity for them to grow up, learn from what they've done, make better choices, start a path that can make them be actually somebody's neighbor again someday, and have that be something that's a real possibility in a positive way.
Thank you. And I think you exactly right. And I think, Representative Hardisher would feel the same way. This is not a partisan issue. It's doing, what we think is right issue. So we really appreciate that. Well, let me switch a little bit and get to some of people of faith. Reverend Hackett, we appreciate your being here. And you have worked with some of the young offenders. What brings you to have an interest in this issue? Where would you like to see us go? You may be on mute, Reverend.
I guess you see, I'd rather listen than do a lot of talking. So I think my interest really starts with basic value for human life. I think that our culture and our society, we put too much attention with retributive concerns, or I would say giving someone their just desert. I think our system works too hard to be retributive when I think the focus should be restorative. Senator Larson, you said something that was so wonderful. You mentioned responsibility and accountability. What is it that we really call being responsible, accountable? Serving time, throwing away the key. I don't see how that putting someone in prison for the rest of their lives serves the purpose of restoration, right? So at the end of the day, what do we really want? We want these people to become law-abiding citizens. We want these people to serve in our communities and have the gracious opportunity to become one with their families and communities again. That doesn't happen when we lock someone up and throw away the key. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some type of retribution, or I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some type of deterrence, because a lot of this life sentence stuff and without parole, that's deterrence. It's deterrence in the fact that it's saying that, listen, I want to deter anybody from doing that. This is what will happen if anybody does that. It is working as a deterrence. And what we really should be focused on, I personally believe, is not just retributive action or deterrence, but those two can merge with restoration. And so I'm a firm believer, and I think that faith heads towards the direction of restorative justice, meaning that I think it was mentioned that there's a major concern for the victim. And yes, restorative justice covers that. In fact, restorative justice is about relationships and repairing and healing those relationships, possibly between the offender and the victim. And I think that my personal experience is very unique because, you know, I may be a doctor now, but I served 14 years in prison myself, you know, and now I sit and hold the keys to incarceral fences that once held me. And I can tell you from a unique experience that spending a long time in prison does not rehabilitate. So if we're working to get them back in the community to become these people that are law-abiding citizens or good citizens, like incarceration for a long period of time is not the answer. It is not the answer. So yes, I stand in the part that I believe that these young folk should have an opportunity to return to society at some point. And you know, if it's about, I believe that if it's about keeping society safe, if it's about, this thing is really about keeping society safe, then long-term incarceration is not the answer. I believe that I think that incarceration, yes, does it work? Sure it does in the short term, but when you start talking about life sentences and without parole, without opportunity, you take away hope. And when hope steps in the room, there's hopelessness. And when hopelessness steps in the room, there's no telling what you're going to get.
Thank you. That's very profound, and hope that if good behavior, I guess, while incarcerated can help them get released, that's good for everyone as well. So we really appreciate, hope to get back to you. Reverend Webster, thanks for being here. Tell us, what are your thoughts and why are you interested in this issue?
Well, this coming Saturday, I will be sitting at a table for about 12 hours in the Cabarrus Youth Development Center. It's basically a high school and prison for juveniles. And as always in the past, I'm sure this time, once again, I'll find young men who they're like any other young men. And we will be working with them, talking with them about redemption and changes and forgiving and finding forgiveness. And I just really believe that lives can be turned around. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of dedication on the part of these young people, because if they continue the way they're going, and I don't know what kind of sentences the young men have. We never talk about what the crime was or what their sentence is, but I know many of them will be getting out. Others may be in for life. But I just see young men who, you know, when they're away from the crowd, when they're away from the gang, when they're away from the drugs, they're just normal young people. And I believe they do need a chance, some hope for the future. And I've sat with them around the table when it's time to pray. They ask for prayer for their parents, for their younger brothers and sisters. Some of them become very open and very much desiring to have a change in their life. So I believe there is redemption.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your work and good luck on Saturday.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn it to one of the people we're talking about, Anthony Willis. Anthony is a remarkable person. I've had the honor to meet him and be with him and listen to him. Anthony, tell us a little bit briefly about your experience and where you think we should go on this issue.
Well, good afternoon. I just want to say thank you for this opportunity just to be able to be on here, to be a voice for the men and women who are still incarcerated. This is such a profound issue because it affects so many people, not just those who are incarcerated, but the lives of the families, the victims, our community, and our future as a society as a whole. So this is a major issue. And the fact that all these other states have already made these strides to make these changes, that's something we should take a hard look at, because if other states can do that, then North Carolina can as well. So whenever I was first incarcerated as a teenager, it's very hard to go to prison as a child. Everything that you were taught from your parents, that goes out the window. It's a totally different culture while you're in prison. And you don't really have that guidance, that mentor, that person to try to help you to develop into an adult. So if you have a life without parole sentence, there is no incentive at all to do the right thing. There's no incentive to get an education or to not join the gangs or not to incur a lot of infractions. There is no incentive to respect the guards or rules. Why would you do those things if you know you will never, ever have a chance to be released? So if a person knowing that at some point in their life, they may have a slim chance of having an opportunity to be rejoined to their family, even if it's 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, I think will make a huge impact. I think it'll make the prisons a safer environment for the staff. I think it would give hope, like I heard many others I've addressed here before. And I just think that people, they can change. If anyone does not believe that, I ask them to take a hard look at my life. If you'd have saw me at the age of 16, I assure you, it's not the same person sitting here in this chair today. Because I was a 16-year-old. I thought I knew everything. I had all the answers. I didn't want to listen to anyone. I thought I could talk myself out of any situation. But the day I was arrested for first-degree murder and robbery with a dangerous weapon, there was nothing I could say or do to change that. And I respect the district attorney, Neiman. You have to be a voice for the victims. I respect what you're doing because we cannot forget the fact that people were hurt. They still live with that every day. And every day I have to live with the actions that I did, live with those consequences. So that's why I try to make every positive thing in my life to show that people can change. I can't change what I did, but I can change my heart, my desires, my vision, my mission for my life. Now I want my life to have purpose and to add value. And if I can say anything to maybe help this laws to be changed, I would say this. When you were 16 years old, did you ever do anything that you would not do now as a 30 or 40, 50-year-old? The answer would probably be yes. When you were a 16-year-old, did you ever make a rash decision or put yourself in a situation that could have been compromised or put yourself in danger because it was just fun? You'd probably say yes. But then I asked, would you do those same things today as a 40 or 50-year-old? You'll probably say no. So how do we know that these individuals who made that split decision, that rash choice as a teenager, would not do those same things as an adult? If we don't give them that hope of having that chance of being released, then we will never know the answer to that question. And it would never guarantee their release. But all it would do is saying, if you do the right thing, if you obey the rules and show that you have earned that right, then you may have a chance. And I think that will help everyone, the community, the staff members, and their families, just to have that hope.
Thank you, Anthony. We appreciate it very much. You have a lot of wisdom, and we need to hear more. Well, one thing about we haven't brought up, and this is part of the TREC report, that there is a racial bias. That over 90% of juveniles who were sentenced to life without parole were juveniles of color, primarily African American. Should that play a role in this movement? Or is it irrelevant? And that's up for anybody. How would you answer that? Representative Hardister, you introduced the bill. Was that a persuasive issue for you when you became a primary sponsor?
Yeah, I remember us talking about that, and I think it is relevant. I think all the data is relevant, right? I mean, if there's one demographic that appears to be more likely to be sentenced, that's definitely something that we should take into account. So yeah, I think we should absolutely consider all that data, and that should be part of the decision-making process. I know those conversations can be difficult to have, but we need to have them, and we need to listen to people like Anthony and others who have been through the system before. And I mean, this has been a really good conversation today. And, talking about the fact this is a balancing act, that, there are victims of crime that we have to take into account. And then we have to take into account what happens to those who are sentenced as a juvenile without the possibility of parole, and, how this affects them, and not only them, but their families as well. So yeah, absolutely. All of that should be considered and part of the discussion. And we should take all that into account as we make a decision.
Thanks. Anyone else have a comment on the racial disparity of imposing such a sentence? Let me ask this then, Jeff, let me ask you as a district attorney, and Anthony was granted clemency by the governor and was released because of his outstanding personality, everything he did while he was incarcerated, the classes, his leadership. If you go back to a victim and there had been a sentence, there had been a jury decision, the judge had issued this, and now you as a DA would go back to a victim's family and said, well, the parole board may be reconsidering, or the governor may be considering clemency. I know there is DA input in doing that. Is there any way you approach that or wouldn't approach it when you go back to victims?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm in the middle of that process with a case right now. And I don't have extensive experience on it because I guess this is the first one of these that's come up since I've become DA, but I believe it appears to be the practice for the governor's office to first reach out to us to give us a platform to be heard on the question of clemency, and then either through us or through their own contact, victims are allowed to be given a platform to be heard about. And in these cases, usually victims' families, because they're most often first-degree murders, obviously. I guess I just say that, you know, I'll relate the conversation that I have with victims all the time, which is that I'm not their lawyer, and it's not my job to, similar if they hired me as their civil lawyer, my job is to go in there and advocate for the position of them as my client, and they're not my client. However, as I alluded to before, both morally and legally, and I guess now constitutionally, they have a right to be heard and have a vote and input when those kinds of decisions are made. And so I guess to that question, Representative, I'd just say that I believe that's a good thing. I think that victims should have a chance to be heard. They don't have they're not the decision makers, but they should have a vote and an input on these kinds of decisions.
Thanks. And yeah, they should be heard, but maybe not the ultimate decision maker, which remains with, you know, the DA and the system, and then the parole board or the clemency. But we passed Marsy's Law as a constitutional law, you know, a few years ago to have input with all the victims in any case. So I think that was an important step for victims' rights. Representative Smith, do you have anything you'd like to add with that?
No, I mean, I would agree with everything the DA just mentioned. I mean, when I was a prosecutor, I primarily handled domestic violence matters, child abuse matters. So I worked closely with actual victims. You know, sometimes the victim is just the state of North Carolina. So the crimes I prosecuted, it was very you know, victim intensive, and so Marsy's Law played a you know, important role in what I did and what my assistant did. And so I had frequent contact with victims of crime, and certainly their input's important, but it is also, you know, important to recognize that justice is not just for the victim, but it's also for the defendant. And, you know, when prosecuting a case, you know, I always not only looked at the circumstances of my victim, but also the circumstances of the defendant, the environment in which they grew up, age, criminal record, things of that nature, and deciding how, and obviously the facts of the case as well, the nature of the case, the charges, you know, to determine how essentially aggressive to prosecute, what type of you know, if I'm going to offer some type of plea offer, you know, what type of plea offer I'm going to offer, what type of sentencing, you know, I'm looking at, whether it's a, you know, probationary sentence, or if it's a, you know, high enough felony, or if there's enough sentencing points, am I going to be asking for active time. So I think when we think about criminal justice, it's not just certainly you want to hold people accountable, and you want to seek justice for the victim, but the defendant's circumstances and their lives, their characteristics are important also.
Right. One thing, and Anthony was the benefit of this, in the TREC recommendations was for the governor to establish the Juvenile Sentencing Review Board. And he is looking at cases of anyone under the age of 18 who has served more than 20 years in prison to see if they would be eligible for clemency. And there are over 230 cases. I'm the chair of that 4-member board, and we're reviewing cases, giving our recommendations. It's ultimately the governor's decision, but this is for the clergy. One thing that we do when we make a recommendation, if we do, is to look at, the public safety, the reentry. So when Anthony's case came up, he had a very strong group of supporters and a very good plan to re-enter into the community. What's the role of the churches or the communities if someone is parole eligible or clemency eligible to help these people make success back into their community? Reverend Webster, do you have a thought?
Yes, I think definitely the church has an interest, and unfortunately, and I think it was due to lack of funding, Epiphany Ministries had a halfway house for a number of years where juveniles that got out, realizing that often they would go back into the neighborhood or the home situation that really had a lot to do with the crime they committed. The halfway house was a great place for them to be with good influence. And unfortunately, that closed down. As I say, I think we just couldn't get the money to run it anymore. But I definitely believe that churches need to be involved.
And I'm sorry, Senator Larson, you have a thought?
Yes, I just wanted to add that in the law that we passed, it says a defendant whose sentence is reduced under this section must be ordered to serve a period of supervised release of at least 5 years upon release from imprisonment. And I think that does two things. I think it gives the public the idea that this person is still going to be watched and held accountable, but it also provides that support and better transition back into the community with some assistance from a parole officer. And so I think that, I don't know what your law does, but I think that was an important component of the one that we passed.
Thank you. That's a great point. There are some supervision after release for clemency that have been in place as well. So anyone else have thoughts about reentry? Representative Hackett or Reverend Hackett?
So reentry is a integral part of the success of anyone leaving prison. But I think it starts with the volunteers. I think that the church's interests at a whole are very interested if they know about it. I don't think that we have a immense capacity of churches who realize that the prison ministry is very, very important. But I do think that it is supported, and it's even supported by our governor, this reentry. So I don't know why I'm so choked up right now. So reentry starts with volunteers. I think the more that volunteers that come into the prison facilities to help and assist offenders with their religious regard, as they become more inclined or can produce some level of unconditional regard with and bring the community to the prison, I think that those volunteers are more prepared to help and produce with attention to what's needed. I think that the more that we involve churches, the more that they can come in and find out what's needed and can help prepare us. TAN, the Transitional Aftercare Network for the state of North Carolina, one of the things that they do is they send volunteers into the prisons to connect and be mentors with the offenders while they're in, anywhere from 6 months to a year. Now, during that year, they come in and assist them with their visions, their goals, the things that they want to achieve. And so when they get out, they act as mentors for them in the community to help them get their necessities, to help them get the housing, the clothing, the identifications that they need. This is the way that that program should work. And I think that if we had more programming that could do such things, meaning start while they're incarcerated, not when they get out. You know, when I got out of prison, I didn't have anything but a couple of white bags full of books that I had purchased, and I didn't have no connections to the community or anything like that. I'm not sure what Mr. Willis had. Like you said, he had some good people behind him, some good Christian people behind him, and churches behind him to help him. Now, I wasn't afforded that gracious opportunity, but I do know that you can be very successful if you got support while you're in. So when you get out, that support will be there for you. Because housings, jobs, that's the real support that you need to make it when you re-enter society, especially after being incarcerated a decade or more, especially.
And thank you. And Anthony, how would you follow up? What were the biggest hurdles for you when you were released?
Well, like you said, one of the biggest ones were technology. You know, just the way that society has changed so much. The things that I've known, 26 years before were no longer in existence. They don't have cassette players anymore. What? No cassette players? So everything is like Bluetooth and MP3 players, all these things. Toilets flush by themselves. Everything is different. And when you're getting out of prison, you have to learn all these things. So if you don't have a safety net of supporters, like Chaplain Hackett was saying earlier, and Mr. Webster was saying that how the church plays a very vital role. There are a lot of programs in society, like specifically Charlotte. There's a lot of programs to help those once they are released. So there are some programs in place. But I think one of the biggest issues is allowing those who are being released to know about those programs. Because a lot of the people, they just don't know they exist. And if so, then they can't utilize those programs. And there's one other thing I want to mention earlier about how the system works together. And I think anyone who is opposing allowing individuals to have that opportunity for parole, to think about this. The prison staff, the parole board, the juvenile sentencing review board, the system, they all work together because we have to trust their judgment. We have to trust the judgment of those that were elected to be in those positions, to say, well, we've observed them, we looked at their record, we looked at the way they behave themselves while they're in prison. So if they're not conducting themselves while they're in prison, the prison is not going to promote them to minimum custody. All right. If they're not doing the right thing, then a parole board is not going to say, well, we should give them an opportunity. But they're demonstrating those things while they're incarcerated, and they have everything against them. I mean, if they decide to grant them that parole, we have to trust that that was the best decision until they're proved otherwise. So I think that every person should have that opportunity if they demonstrate it over the span of those years. And if they don't obey the rules while they're in prison, then they won't have that because the parole board would see that and not agree, or the juvenile sentencing review board would not grant that recommendation. So we have to trust that, And I just think that once they are released, there are so many churches, so many organizations who want to help them, whether clothes, jobs, vehicles. And that's one thing I'd help do on my part-time job. I help try to locate resources for those who are being released. So if you know someone's getting out, they need help, just ask them just to reach out to me. And I do everything I can to find them a safe place to live, a job that will help them not just to survive, but to thrive and just be a productive citizen. So anything I can do, I will.
We are our brother's keepers, right?
Absolutely.
As we're wrapping up, have we missed any issue? Does anyone have something, or Carolyn, has any question come in? I think it's been a great discussion. One thing I do want to know before Representative Hardister successfully completes a statewide campaign and may not be in the House next year, what do you see the path forward is for us being successful to get this introduced next term and getting more support on board to go through committees and get a vote?
Well, that's a good question. Well, first of all, if I happen to win this election, I will still be an advocate. I may not have a vote in the General Assembly, but I'm still going to advocate for this and other areas of criminal justice reform. I think really, I think the more grassroots communication we have, getting people to contact members of the House and the Senate would be helpful. I think there's a lot of legislators who just haven't really heard all these stories. Like if they were to listen to this, conversation today, I think that would be persuasive. And for those on the right, who are on the conservative Republican side, I think looking at some of those articles written by like Mark Levin and Newt Gingrich, I think they would find, persuasive, because I think whether your philosophy is more left or right, this really fits on both sides. And that's what's really fascinating about this topic, is whether you're left or right, this fits and it makes sense. And so I think it's really just having conversations like this one, and having people to reach out to members of the House and Senate, and really, frankly, educate them, because a lot of legislators are not, experts in the justice system, and they just, need to have some exposure to this subject so they understand it.
Great. Thank you. Senator Larson, any advice for us?
No, I don't have any advice for you. You're doing your due diligence. You're doing what you're supposed to do, looking at the issues and looking at the pros and cons, and just trying to get more information out for people to make good decisions. So keep on doing what you're doing, I guess.
Okay.
Move
Thank you.
forward.
Okay. I appreciate it. Anybody have any closing thoughts you'd like to express? I know DA Neiman's going to be jumping in a courtroom in a second, but everyone's participation is so important, and viewpoints. Really, thank you. And I forgot to mention, we'd like to really thank the Conservatives for criminal justice reform. Tara Callahan is great at helping find people to speak, and she's been a real advocate helping this issue and push it across. So really thank her. And Carolyn and Brandy, thank you for all your work getting this together. Your work with the TREC, and we couldn't have put this together today without your help. So I will either sign us off if we have no other comments, or pass it back to Justice Earls.
I do want to just thank everyone. This is an amazing panel, and some really important insights. So thank you all, and thank all of you who joined us for this webinar, and stay tuned. TREC will continue to try to host these types of panels, but thank you all very much.
Thank you. And please look in the chat. I know there's some references, resources. We really appreciate it. Preston Shipp with the national organization has been on this, have been a big help. So we'll meet again sometime, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Hey, give me a call, Willis.